How is it hanging, homies? My name is Wynot, and welcome back to another video. This time, discussing my power rankings, so to speak, for the upcoming IEM Rio Major. In just a few days now, today I think is the 27th, we'll be moving down the stretch, probably posting this one around the 28th and having a couple more days of grace to sit and relax with our thoughts and how we feel this will go down. I do have another video on the way potentially before the major is going to drop that I do implore you to check out once it comes out. I've been putting a lot of hard work into that one, but today we're going to be doing pick'ems. I have a little bit of a visualization later on with a website that many people have been using to try and see how the seeding will affect the matches to come and just get a really good idea in general as to who will and won't make their way through into the legend stage of the major. So without further ado, I kind of just want to hop into this one. We'll make our way from the top down, and we'll go at the top 4 teams I expect to be making the legend stage 100%. Otherwise, they will have failed, in my opinion. So these 4 teams here, Vitality, Outsiders, Cloud9, and Furia, are the 4 teams that should absolutely be making that legend stage without a doubt, based on not only our expectations, but as well as the expectations of themselves that they've set moving into this one with rosters that have so much not only firepower, but experience at the majors, as well as just general aspirations to be the best teams in the world, not some team that will make perhaps a top 16 finish at a major. They want to go well beyond legends. That is their minimum goal here. I can only assume that they're aiming for playoffs, all of these teams, if not semis in their own right. And they all do have the chance to make it there, but the first step to getting to that stage is making it through challengers. So it makes a whole lot of sense that these 4 teams are going to be contending for those spots, and these are the teams that I think pretty much necessarily have to make their way in and through. Vitality as a roster with the addition of Spinks, that's looked absolutely sublime. They look like they're a lot more comfortable with a lot of players that can take over a game for you, Zywoo and Spinks obviously being the 2, but more recently than not, Magisk has been stepping up in spades, and I feel like that's just something that bodes well for them moving forward, that Dupree really isn't going to be their shining star, but even still has the potential to take over a round and potentially pull you away with a game. Outsiders, same story, considerably different from the last roster that we'd seen featuring both Buster and Yakindar, but with the additions of Norbert and Fame, I must say that where they did lose the firepower in Yakindar, they gained it back in 2 definitely high output potential players. Both Norbert and Fame have proven themselves worthy of a tier 1 presence, and they've got a lot more room to grow and show because this team is still relatively young. I mean, only having added these players, I think maybe, I'm not sure, actually. We can look it up together. I can't imagine that it's been too much over like half a year now, if that. But yeah, it seems that they just bought them out in May of this year. So yeah, less than 5 months actually into this team's existence, and they're already making strides. Cloud9, not really a whole lot of explanation to be done other than the fact that they are 5 players that have been together for so long, aspiring to be in that number 1 spot, and definitely have the firepower on paper to still make that happen. And it's better now than never that they show that they still have what it takes to be a top team contender, especially at the major. This is where they want to show up in spades. And with Furia, probably the weakest of these 4 teams on paper, as well as in most aspects, they need to find themselves in that Legends stage to show that they have been making that progress with the addition of Safe, who struggled a little bit in the beginning, I have to say, especially on land, but more recently than not, it looks like he started to compose himself, and potentially a run for Furia now in their form as it returns to them to make themselves a name in Rio, of all places, in that Legend stage and onwards. Now, when it comes down to the teams that should be making the Legend stage, not necessarily have to, we hit the big leagues of OG, Mouse, and, well, Big. As these 3 teams don't necessarily have to. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if they didn't. I'd definitely be upset, and I'm sure that they would as well. With the weakest of these 3 being, of course, Big, playing with the stand-in, Sin. They are going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage moving down if they are going to lose out on their opening BO3s, but should they be able to recover in the late game, I do see them having a very strong chance regardless of making their way through. Mouse Sports, having just made the change of the addition of Exertion, of course, in Bimis's, or BMOS, not quite sure how that's pronounced, but in his place is an upgrade, in my opinion, a very good one at that, a player who's very individually talented and much more better suited for the role of being your second star rifle player, behind that of Frozen, who has stepped into the greater shoes of ROPS most recently, especially. I have a good feeling that they're going to have a very strong chance of moving into the Legend stage, and the same goes for OG, making a power play and picking up Dexter. They have the roster now with probably, I'd say, 4, maybe even all 5 players with the potential of going 1-to-1 in any aim duel with any player in the world for the most part, other than perhaps outside of the top 2 or 3 teams. And even on a good day, you'll see players like Dexter out-opping some of the best. So, with these 3 teams having made a few roster changes here and there, all of them seemingly upgrades, except for the fact that Big aren't playing with their full 5-man roster, I do see these teams going through to the Legend stage. But like I said, if they didn't, I would be upset, but it's not necessarily something that they have to do in order to see their progress made, but it would help them a lot to see themselves at the top 16 at this Rio Major. Now, with this major being in Rio itself, these 3 teams should come as no surprise to many people, but perhaps a little bit out of left field, so let me explain. The major being in Rio obviously is going to provide a home crowd advantage to a lot of the Brazilian players and teams at the event right now, but out of those teams, these 2 are quite a league above the rest in terms of experience. Imperial obviously having all of the core of the original major winning rosters of both SK Gaming and Luminosity, with the other 2 in Taco and Cold Zera being on 00 Nation, who are also featured here with teams with very high upset potential with the ability to make their way into that top 8 place. The only 2, or rather the only one of the 3 teams here that isn't Brazilian is going to be Fnatic. It's them who have an international lineup now, who have been seeing a lot of pretty hot results lately with their in-game leader of Mezzi at the helm, making them look like a really solid squad, I have to say. It also does help that they're all very individually skilled and can take on individual aim duels one-on-one, just as Mouse Sports was mentioned earlier to be able to do that. But the difference being is that Mezzi has no experience as an in-game leader on LAN at a major. He doesn't have that pedigree behind him to say that he can lead a team to success at one of the highest tournaments, if not the highest tournament of pedigree in the entirety of the year. In Counter-Strike, it could be maybe Cologne or whatever you would say, but he has a lot to live up to in this team right now, especially at the major. They need him to step up to the plate and show them that they made him their captain for a reason, because the players around him are all capable of winning out on these fights. It's just a matter of looking like a cohesive unit against a lot of rosters that have a little bit more stability in terms of their history together, as well as their histories at the major, because Fasher, obviously a little bit older, but even still, not having that much experience at LAN, let alone at majors against top teams, is going to be perhaps a little bit nerve-wracking, even if he is such a wise old kind of gun that's made his way into the scene a little bit late. Nikodas and Roy, they have had their fair share of major success, and that's one thing that bodes very well for players like Crims, who has to rely on somebody on his team to bring that to the table, because he can't bring that to him on their own. He can't be the player to be the rock all the time. So having those 2 with the last 2 majors in top 8 under their belt is going to be a very nice addition to the roster that Mezzi has in pieces to work with to make this a potentially top 8 team. In my opinion, I think Fnatic has a lot of potential as a roster moving forwards and here in the major, but Imperial and 00 Nation, those 2 teams have been trying their best to make their run at this major look solid, make it look clean, and I have to say that 00 Nation have had their ups and downs, but I think this is where they look to thrive. At the major itself, a lot of hurdles had to have been overcome to get themselves here. Same for Imperial Esports with the removal of FNX and addition of Cello not too long ago. Those 2 teams, I think, definitely have a lot of potential to make their way into the top 8, a lot more than people are giving them credit for at the very least. And I personally kind of hope that one of them makes it through, so we'll have to wait and see if that is going to be the case. Now, one thing that I do want to preface as we move into the lower levels of these teams is that I've labeled these little titles up here, this one being teams with decent upset potential, as such because I don't really think there are very many weak teams in this level of the tournament. I think that at this stage, almost anyone can make their way into the top 8, almost unsurprisingly, other than the last few teams I have to mention here. But these 3 teams, even though they're at the decent upset potential level, have all of the opportunity in the world to make their way into Legends, and I wouldn't be too shocked. 9Z, a player of a team of a lot of very young players who have kind of just recently made their way to this top level and consistently begun to beat other teams out regionally. I mean, all of them have the potential to be star players in their own right on any team that will have them. Buddha, the most recent addition, having replaced Rox, who was quite clearly the odd man out, the weakest link of the bunch, and that upgrade, in my opinion, is quite literally going to bring them to the next level that they were looking to hit. And this could be where they have their breakout. This could be the tournament where these players are seen as what they are. NQZ and Opper, at 17 years old, making his way into this major. One of the youngest players at the tournament, and at all majors in general, as far as I'm concerned, has a lot to live up to in terms of being an Opper who can stand toe-to-toe with the best. Evil Geniuses only recently beginning to show their form. The one thing that bodes really well for me in my mind is the fact that Cirque has actually looked very, very surprisingly good in comparison to what he was showing in the last iteration of the lineup. Perhaps Neelan has what it takes to bring the best out of his AWP player and the rest, because having automatic firing off on all cylinders and Hex T have some very high impact explosive rounds does make me think that Evil Geniuses has a lot better of a chance than I would have given them, say, 2 or 3 months ago. And with that being said, Gamer Legion is quite potentially the most unknown figure that I have at this level. A player being added who hasn't played professionally in a while now, since Mouse Sports, of course you know who I'm speaking of, Acor. He took a little bit of a hiatus off of the game, about 7 months from being on the active Mouse Sports lineup as the Opera, having faltered at a top 1 level for a while there on LAN, makes his way back and stomps in the qualifier as he makes this team look incredibly cohesive. Shui, the former in-game leader of Mouse NXT, makes his way from the Academy roster over into the main roster of Gamer Legion and brings these players together from all different backgrounds with the help of Coach Ash and makes them look stellar as IEM leads the charge as one of the heaviest hitters in all of Tier 2 Counter-Strike, in my opinion, right now. They definitely do have quite the squad to make the damage happen. There are so many teams that Gamer Legion could abuse in the best of ones and make their way through to the legend status practically easy, in my opinion. If they're unread, if they're unwatched, this might be a dangerous roster moving forwards down the line of this event if teams are not prepared for what they bring to the table. And last but not least are the last 3 teams in the event that I find to have the lowest upset potential. However, with Bad News Eagles being at the top of these 3 teams, I will say that having had a little bit of major experience, as well as being very raw and individualized sets of players that don't really rely on their nerves, they kind of just push through and battle ahead. These were hard teams to decide whether or not I should move them up into the medium upset potential or keep them here in the low upset potential. But Bad News Eagles, unfortunately, in my mind, don't really have a whole lot of room to make their way out of maybe 2 wins. I think that they could potentially go 2 and 3 if they get their seeding drawn well for them off of maybe an early win. But other than that, Bad News Eagles, I would be a little bit surprised to see make it to the top 8. But I wouldn't be as surprised as I would if I saw IHC or Greyhound Gaming. IHC have made a roster change as of, well, since the last major, and it's adding Annihilation, a very young, very talented young Mongolian player at 22 years old. He's the new AWP player for the squad who's been sitting on the team for just over 3 months now, I believe, maybe coming up on 4, not quite sure, but he's shown himself to be a valid addition to this squad that could get them maybe a win, maybe 2, but once the best of 3s roll around, I don't see a realistic world where they can find themselves taking on some of the best looking to qualify. With that, we have 1 team left, and that's Greyhound Gaming. The sad part about Greyhound Gaming for me is that I think that they definitely had the potential to be the team that they were looking to be maybe the last major cycle, having added Liaz in place of Malta, but losing Hats, adding Vexite, finds me a little perplexed. I'm not quite sure what the reasoning behind that one was. I thought that Hats was a very, very solid rifler to have into this team. Probably your 2nd star rifler, if not your 1st on occasion behind Ints. But Vexite, not exactly a bad player. I wouldn't say that in the slightest, but not the player that I would look at and find a clear and obvious upgrade in over Hats. And he's going to have to prove that to me here, because if he can't, on paper, it's a worse roster than it was last time around. I'm just not really sure I can rely on them to be that team to make their way into Legends convincingly, or even squeaking through on the best of 3s at the end, but I hope to be proven wrong by all of these teams. So let's now take a look at the Major Sim. It has been created with the sole purpose of looking at the matchups for the majors, using the data that we've been giving and the seeding that we've been given to look how these matches might end up affecting the bracket as we move down the line. So as we look at it right now, they started with Katowice in 2019. That's a long time ago. I didn't realize they were going for that long. But for the major this time around, we're going to be looking at the matchups that have been given to us in the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth rounds. Obviously, the second through fifth rounds will change based on what I pick as the winners for the first. So let's kind of move our way down the line, I guess. I mean, quite clearly, I think OG are favored in beating Greyhound, Vitality over Imperial, EG and IHC. Probably one of the first toss-ups that we have here, and I would say that me personally, I am a little bit more of a believer in the EG squad. Having Automatic on the team as the clear star rifler for the team does give me a lot of hope against the star riflers of the side of IHC. Having been a major winner, I trust in him, and I trust in his ability to take them that one step further beyond on LAN. And I hope that he still has that in him, because if he does, then that bodes really well for them up against IHC. So I'm going to go with EG. Cloud9 versus Fnatic, I think, is a pretty easy one as well. Furia being a favorite to make their way into the Legend stage against Big, who are playing with a stand-in. I would stick with them. 0-0 Nation, I give the edge over BNE because of their LAN XP and their cohesiveness as a team lately has been looking much better. Outsiders over Mouse Sports, I don't think is too out there either. And then for this last one, this is where we get a little bit interesting. This is once you get to the bottom side of these brackets, you really start to break them and change them. As you can see, 9Z winning changes 2 different matchups already, switching these 2 teams out for who will be playing what, and then that just goes and continuously breaks down the remainder of the rounds. So I think that I am going to stick with 9Z as a team that has a core that's been together for a little while longer. I'm sure that they have better protocols to be playing with one another on LAN than the other team does just yet, not having built that cohesiveness. I like that word cohesive a lot if you haven't already recognized, but I mean, just plain and simply, they've just got a better lineup to stand against that pressure that LAN might provide to you, especially at a major. In Brazil, the home crowd favorite, of course, for NQZ to thrive at 17 years old in this environment. We'll have to wait and see the difference between him and Acor here, because obviously Acor has much more experience as an AWPer in general. So I'm going to pick 9Z. It could go either way, in my opinion, but that's what I'm going to stick with. And then we make our way to the top of the bracket. I think OG is favored over Furia purely because of Dexter. I think Dexter is going to be the difference maker against Safe, and then from there, the rest of the riflers are going to be able to make good off of the space that he makes and close out the rounds. Vitality over OO Nation, Outsiders over EG, Cloud9 over 9Z, Big over Greyhound, Imperial over BNE for the same reasons, actually. That's kind of weird that I was going to put them over, or 0-0 Nation over them in the last round, Mouse over IHC, and Fnatic over Gamer Legion. So now we make our way into the elimination and advancement process. Vitality, I think, beats out OG, or at least they should. On paper, I feel like it just makes the most sense that Vitality are going to be the team to go 3-0. I feel like it's not that hard to predict. Same goes for Cloud9 as the better of the 2 CIS teams in recent and long-term history, where outsiders only now look to challenge them for that place. I don't think that this is going to be the day. I think Cloud9 make their way through. I think Furia is probably going to beat out Imperial, although I think it'll actually go to 3 maps. EG probably lose out to Big here in the 1-1. Same goes to Fnatic against Mouse. 9Z against 0-0 Nation, I think I'm going to give to 0-0 Nation. Again, experience is big for me, and all of these players are relatively inexperienced on LAN in general at this level, and Buddha is entirely new to it. So I think that having Coldzera and Taco in your corner is going to mean a whole lot for them in the mid and late rounds, that 9Z might fall apart. I think that IHC probably takes the game against Greyhound, and that Gamer Legion take it against BNE. BNE and Gamer Legion's a little bit of a toss-up, but I think this one's a little bit more clear-cut. I'm not entirely sure. I think Greyhound actually beat them at the qualifier for this in the final. I think it was just for prize money, though. I'm not sure, but yeah, I'm going to go with Greyhound. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Why not? I'll give it to him. And then, of course, I think that this one could be a toss-up, like I said, so I'm just going to lean Gamer Legion because I like Gamer Legion and I'm biased. OG beat Mouse, in my opinion. Outsiders beat Big. Furia beat 0-0 Nation. They move into the 2-1 bracket, and these 3 teams will advance. I think that 9Z beats out Greyhound. I think Fnatic will beat EG. I think that one's a little bit of a toss-up, but I think Fnatic still edge it out. And then Gamer Legion versus Imperial, I think, will be based on the fact that these players on the Brazilian side are just a lot more prepared to be playing in Rio, I can only assume, in their home turf with all the players who are familiar with this qualification stage, ready to make their way on and through. I think Gamer Legion are just going to be a little bit overwhelmed by some of the unexpected readiness of their opponents on some of the maps they'll have to play in a best of 3. And then as we go to the end, this is where things get interesting. I think Mouse beat 9Z almost definitely. Unfortunately, they will not be making it through, but a 2-3 finish is not bad at all for the team that I had in the decent upset potential bracket. Big versus Imperial, I honestly think might go Imperial's way, seeing as Big have a stand-in. They have a lot to work around, a lot of uncomfortable positions now that they have to maneuver through with a player that they're not really familiar with just yet, but I'm not sure how much preparation they will have done. I'm not sure how much preparation Imperial would have done, but I'm really confident that I think that Imperial are going to make their way into that Legend stage, and I, like I said earlier, personally want them to as well. And then as we go to the end, 0-0 Nation versus Fnatic. This is a super toss-up. This could see 3 Brazilian teams make their way through the playoffs potentially if Fnatic can't keep themselves together. And honestly, it being the Rio Major and me being in the spirit of keeping the dream alive of having all 5 major winners from Brazil in the Legend stage, I'm going to say 0-0 Nation. Despite me liking Fnatic more as a team, I'm going to stick with it. And these are going to be my teams to make it through into that Legends stage. And then next we'll just go into my pick'ems, my personal pick'ems, and we'll go from there. And last but not least, we go into the pick'ems themselves. We're going to just do this based on my own personal opinion, having already seen the visualizer and the power rankings. You have a little bit of an idea of how you might want to look at it for yourself. And now I'm going to give you my personal picks. So for the 3-0, you usually want to pick a team that you can guarantee to go through onto the Legend stage and not a team you actually think are going to go 3-0. So for that, I think that OG have the chance. I think they're definitely going to make it through. So I'm going to put them there. Vitality, I think Cloud9, I think Furia. I think that Outsiders, I think that Mouse, I think that Imperial, I think that Fnatic. I think it's pretty safe to say that IHC might go 0-3. Their opener will be the biggest tell, but you know what? This probably makes more sense given what I said earlier. So yeah, that's basically what I'm going to go for my pick'ems, and that's going to wrap up the video, essentially. I mean, I have Vitality, Cloud9, Outsiders, Furia, Mouse, OG, Imperial, and Fnatic going through to that next level. I'd like to see these teams go through. It's not entirely potential that they're going to. This is just my personal opinion, obviously. I think Big have a very good chance of going through, but I think it's safer to go with these other teams because it's more likely that they'll go through, considering their circumstances. And with that, we'll update the picks, and we'll lock them in. So thank you guys so much for joining me here for this video. I appreciate it, and I hope that you can drop a like down below. I do have another video coming up a little bit soon, sooner rather than later, so if you want to stick around for that, turn on those notifications, and, you know, maybe just hang around in the Discord, which will be in the description below if you want to join that one, talk some Counter-Strike, hang out, and maybe we can watch the Mage together. Who knows what we'll be doing around here. But that's going to be all for me this time around, homies. Hang out, have a good time, and I'll see you in the next video.